So you mentioned ballet before.
Mm-hmm.
Those were your sort of fairly early kind of experiences with art, with an art form. How did that influence your music making, do you think? Is there any?
I think there's a definite link in that's the language, that's the form within the language that sort of dominated, or that seemed to take over the language that I then wanted to speak, if that makes any sense. But also orchestral music. I found that I responded very strongly to orchestral music. The other significant thing is that our landlady, who was our next door neighbor, was an eminent musicologist from Trinidad, and she had a choir, a folk choir called La Petite Musicale. And my sister and I used to go over to her house very regularly. And we would, whenever she had rehearsals of a choir, we would go and listen to the rehearsals. We'd sit in on the rehearsals and we'd sit under the piano. And this is from the age of about 3 years old. All those sort of sounds, just kind of literally being bathed in sounds. You're sitting underneath a piano. At night, wherever you lived in Trinidad, you're constantly hearing drums being played. Because not far from where we lived, there was a little village. People at night would play drums. It might have been for pleasure, it might have been in association with some sort of ritual or something that was going on, or to accompany dancing or whatever. Plus there was a church choir. From the age of 10, I sort of boldfacedly went with my guitar that I'd been learning for a year and told them I wanted to play the guitar for the choir. So they welcomed me in. I started playing Christian folk music for the Catholic Church.
So you're saying Christian folk music?
Yeah, Christian folk music. What at that time in the Catholic Church in the 70s was called the folk mass. So it was an updating of, it wasn't even an updating, it was a whole new repertoire of songs that had been written to entice young people into the Catholic Mass. So there was this huge repertoire of songs, basically, with guitar and tambourine and drums and bass kind of accompaniment. And I was playing along with that from the ages of 10 to about 14, 15. So all of that sort of put together with everything else that was going on. Plus, I had 2 older brothers. One was a bass player, the other one played percussion. And the age gap between us was significant enough for their musical taste to sort of completely impact on me. My oldest brother was a complete Jimi Hendrix nut. So when I got my guitar, the very first thing that he did was to sit me down and teach me to play Voodoo Child or I don't know, and insist that I played with him while he played double bass. So there's a whole mix of stuff going on, really.
So where did you begin your formal musical training? So can you tell me a little bit about those experiences?
Well, I started from the age of 5 with our next door neighbor, Olive Walk. She gave us piano lessons. We continued with her more or less up until the age of 8 or 9. I keep saying we, it's my sister and I. And then when Olive died, there was a pause on the lessons. And then from the age of 9, I started classical guitar, taking lessons with a teacher in Trinidad. And then that continued more or less steadily right up until the end of my A-levels. I changed teachers when I was about 13 or 14, moved on to a better teacher. And in between, at a certain point, I think I played clarinet for a year. I trained with, I was taking lessons actually with the clarinet, the clarinetist of the police band in Trinidad. So that was fun. I really enjoyed playing clarinet.
Why did you stop? Or did you stop?
I did stop, but then I moved on to saxophone when I went to France, when I went to study in France. So in Trinidad, that was more or less my formal training between piano, guitar, and a little bit of clarinet for a year. And then everything went on to a different sort of level from the time I left Trinidad and moved to Paris to supposedly to study musicology, but actually ended up doing intensely just classical guitar training with the intention of sitting the entrance exam for the Paris Conservatory.
So because we were talking before a little bit about the musicology thing that initially propelled you to make the move to France.
Well, we'd always known that I was going to go and study music in France in any case. How I was going to study really was going to be the question. So my mother's solution was musicology. My solution was I am going to be a composer, however I do that. I had visions of myself sort of writing for theatre and film. I loved writing for theatre. I loved the whole idea of music for theatre. Because also I'd grown up with Derek Walcott's theatre in Trinidad. He was living in Trinidad at the time, and we knew the family well, but he was running Trinidad Theatre Workshop. So he had this theatre company where we would see his plays being performed in Trinidad with Trinidadian performers. And so when The Joker of Seville was ready, when he had completed that play and it was performed in Trinidad, for me that was a huge revelation. You know, it's like, shit, this is what a musical can look like. A Trinidadian musical can look like, you know, and the music obviously sort of immediately resonated with us, you know, so we knew all the songs off by heart. And it immediately sort of opened doors. It said, you know, you could do it. He did it, so can you.
All right, I has to wait, but for the spin is so great.
I see your ass on that hill, your ass be mine, I swear it will.
Don't push your luck, my little prince. These words I will not mince.
I see you on the hill again. I'll be laughing last, my friend. It will be the end. You'll find your princess back in bed. You'll be lying next to her cap in your head.
And of course, you know, when you look back, or when I look back, the music was written by Galt MacDermot, the American composer who wrote the music for Hair, and who had a great hit with Hair. And he shaped it to Derek's words and to the rhythms, of course, that sat with Trinidad. But it was still sort of, and so what I'm basically trying to say is, like, while it wasn't a pure Trinidadian composition, the important, the essential ingredients, which were the words, the lyrics of those songs in that musical, in Joker of Seville, they came from a Caribbean writer. And you could, you know, I could immediately see, yeah, our language can exist. It has a place, you know, here it is in the world. So that was the intention. That's why I was heading off to do the same.
Which teachers in your life do you think had sort of the most profound influence on you, good or bad?
I'd definitely say my guitar teacher and my piano teacher in Paris, in France. And that's just music teachers. And in Trinidad, the most profound teachers were my history teacher at high school and my English literature teacher at high school. Just because the English literature teacher imbued us with such a love of words and of Shakespeare. She taught it beautifully. And no sentimentality. She was very no-nonsense in her teaching. And you immediately knew the limits, but overall, what she communicated was this love and respect of the language. And our history teacher was exactly the same. There was just this overall knowledge of history. And with her, we were taught the history of the West Indies, actually, you know, from the 16th, 17th century. So we were instructed in the slave trade and how colonialism sort of took root in the islands. And she was Canadian, she was white Canadian, and she made no bones about making sure that we understood our history and that we knew how Trinidad had come about and how the islands had come about. And as a result, of course, you know the history of Europe, you know, in learning that. And all of that sort of infused itself into how I approach music, because that knowledge, that love, that sort of wide panoramic view is what has dominated the way that I approach music and the way that I approach composition. And then after that, the person who probably had the most profound influence on me was my guitar teacher, Ramón de Herrera, in Paris. Because this was the first time that I was experiencing a really nurturing relationship with a teacher, one-to-one, where he encouraged me not just technically on the instrument, but musically. So his approach was very organic. It was about you as a musician, how you interpret, how you feel, how you understand the music, and how you put that across. And so it was almost like it was becoming a new person. You know, it was a completely different approach to music. It wasn't. I was going to say it wasn't robotic. And I was going to say robotic very simply because that had been the approach to music, more or less up until then. You know, it was like, read the notes. And there was very little thought about the music, where this music might have come from. And having this relationship with him and having my eyes open to how one thinks about music completely changed my approach to music. And similarly, because a few years later, I studied piano with Michel Charapin in Paris, who's, I think she might have just retired now, but who was a teacher at the Lyon Conservatory. Very, very fine pianist, and who taught me about sound, the sound of the piano, and again, musicality, you know, and listening to music. I mean, in that sense, I feel that I was really blessed in having the experience of studying with both of them, just because it opened it opened me to a completely different and new way new for me, new way of approaching music, thinking about music, playing music, reading music, expecting something from music and expecting something from myself in relation to music. So suddenly it became about how music becomes a way of life, almost, I suppose.
I mean, it's interesting that you sort of talk about the use of lyrics. So do you think that often, or text, that text often sort of does the difficult work of structure?
I think you're right, that text is a huge aid in structure, because it gives structure to something, it gives structure to a work, and then the music sort of draws itself out of that, you know, the structure of the music then becomes apparent. But once the text, the words, whatever, it's like they provide a body. It's very different, of course, when I'm writing just music, which I realize I haven't done for a little while, because I seem to have been writing mostly to words over the past 3 years, songs, choral pieces. No, actually, sorry, I lie. There was a suite of songs and dances that I wrote with no last year and the year before. But again, you know, it's like I had to find a way of sort of getting into the structure. I knew what I wanted to do, and I based it on dances to get a sense of form, to get at least an initial idea or a form and a starting point. But text helps.
This is a narration thing. Deep beep, beep ba bum bum ba da.
That's it.
That's it. Right. Right. That's the great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you put words to that as well?
Yeah, we have words. Mustafa, Nick, and I put words.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah. How long did it take you to find a working method that works, or are you still searching?
You know, I'm not really aware of how long it took me. Again, it sort of depended on what I was writing for. When I used to write a lot for radio drama, for example, I wrote music for all 38 Shakespeare plays for an audio recording. It's called the Archangel Complete Shakespeare Collection. And I'd be recording, say, the music for one play at least every 6 weeks. It was a project that existed over 4 years. And I had I had a budget for musicians, and the recording studio was all covered. But I'd invariably have about 15 to 40 minutes of music to write per play. Although 40 minutes was more exceptional. It was usually between 15 and 20 minutes per play. And I found, because of the demand, it was sort of non-stop composition, non-stop work. I found a method that worked for me. And since then, that's a method that I've mostly employed. Every time I have a new piece or new work to write, I simply just start early in the morning and keep writing. Although, again, with age and time, I find that I can't write for as long periods as I used to be able to.
All right, so the first song is.
First song is this one.
Jamboree.
Jamboree. Hello, hello, welcome to my arrow.
Right.
And the carnival jamboree. Ba, 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 dum.
Which piece of yours do you think best reflects your cultural heritage?
I'm torn between my opera, Bird of Night, and Jab Molassie, which was my more recent piece that I wrote in 2014. Bird of Night, I would say, represents the widest, the full breadth of my expression, of my musical expression. Jab Molassie expresses the Caribbean rootedness of my musical language. And which one I would talk about? Probably, I think Bird of Night. Because in Bird of Night, I would say that as a composer, I felt completely whole. Because it integrated absolutely everything from very deliberately written folk idioms to completely free music, really. Free from me, free from all constraints. And also in that it had most of the instrumentation that really resonates with me. It was for chamber orchestra, but with a fairly significant percussion section that included lots of sounds and instruments that are typical of the Caribbean, like biscuit tins, horsehair, fly swatters. Well, they're made of raffia, but I use those. Bamboos, I use a lot of bamboos. The chorus was singing and playing rhythms on tall lengths of bamboo sticks. But equally, there were some very, very lyrical passages for the heroine Apolline. There's one section, one aria that she has where she's flying at night. It's the first time that she's flying at night. And it's accompanied just by bass flutes, I think, and viola and voice. And it's just completely free. It was such a pleasure to write that aria. And in between, there's just it's like the joy of playing with the orchestra, playing with all those instruments, playing with the chorus, playing with the soloists, and just feeling that nice weight, supported weight of the orchestra behind, supporting the voices. And playing with rhythm, playing with melody, playing with harmony, and just feeling, just feeling like everything just came together.